All right, everybody. Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock. My name is Brett Olson, and I'm the Development Director at Buckeye Hills Regional Council down in Marietta. And I want to thank you for joining us today for this virtual Q&A with the Office of Budget and Management, as well as partners from around the region. We're excited to bring this session to you today. Unfortunately, we couldn't have the State of the Region conference that we normally have together in Athens, but we still wanted to provide an opportunity for us to collaborate and connect together and share information. So we're pleased to be bringing you this session. So today I want to thank we have 3 special guests with us today, so I want to thank them for being with us today. First, Director Kimberly Murnieks from the Office of Budget and Management joins us today. Also with us is Mayor Donald Mason of the City of Zanesville and Mayor Charlie Hudson of Wellston. So I want to thank them for being with us today and taking the time to share some information with us. So before we get started, I have a couple informational items for everybody that's on the line. So everybody is muted upon entry. When we do the Q&A, you can click the microphone in the bottom bar to unmute yourself. You can also choose to have your camera on or off. That is your preference. You can start and stop your video down in the bottom bar as well next to mute. During the session today, you are welcome to please use the chat box if you'd like. You can ask questions, you can drop comments, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the session, and we'll keep track of that as we go on. And it'll also be a good way to interact in the Q&A. You can also use the raise hand question or the raise hand feature, and I will call on folks to and unmute you as we go through the questions and answers as well. Those that might be calling in and not on video today, thanks for joining us as well. If at the end, if you have questions and you're on the phone, you can always email those to Mackenzie Kucharski, and I'm going to give you her email address real quick. It's kucharski@ohio.edu. So folks on the phone, if you have questions, you can email them there, and we'll get them into the mix as well. And lastly, but maybe most importantly, this session will be recorded, and we will share it with everybody that's on the call after the session. I'm really excited. We had over 90 folks register for this, and right now we have 87 folks on the line. So my appreciation to you, and thank you for joining us today, and we're looking forward to getting started. So you'll see some instructions there on the screen as well if you're having questions about navigating Zoom. The slide there illustrates some directions, information as well. So with that, I think we will go ahead and move into the presentation and the Q&A with Director Murnieks.
Okay, thank you. Very happy to be here today. I am a proud graduate of Warren Local High School in Washington County and a graduate of Marietta College. So very excited to be part of this group. And I'll give a brief overview of the coronavirus relief funding that was in the Federal CARES Act that we are at OBM administering on behalf of the state of Ohio. I'll talk a little bit about the funding, how local governments can apply, how the funds can be used, and then I do have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. I'll talk through those and then open it up for any other questions that we have today. So with that, I will say the coronavirus relief dollars in the CARES Act were appropriated by Congress in the CARES Act that was passed in late March. And Ohio's allocation was received to the state in April. And in June, the Ohio General Assembly passed House Bill 481 and signed by the governor, and OBM is the state agency that is administering those dollars. The House Bill 481 appropriated $350 million of those CARES Act funds to local communities across Ohio. And the way the dollars are allocated is based on our local government fund allocations. And the dollars flow first to counties, and then counties disperse them onto cities, villages, and townships. And again, according to the local government fund, Ohio's local government fund formula. So to receive those dollars, a local community, a local government needs to pass a resolution basically saying that they will abide by the rules in the CARES Act and submit that to your county, send a copy to OBM, and also register on our website because there will be some reporting. The website to register is grants.ohio.gov. And that is actually a new website that we were actually working on before the pandemic started as a portal to bring together all different. We know that different state agencies have different grants programs, and it's kind of hard for folks to have to navigate all 25 or 26 state agencies to find funding opportunities that you need. So we were already, before the pandemic, working on bringing together this grants.ohio.gov site. The pandemic caused us to ramp up our efforts and get it up quickly so we could have this local government coronavirus relief fund opportunity posted there. That was the first opportunity posted. And if you go to that site, you'll see a few others. There's, we now have a coronavirus relief funding for libraries is posted there now. We have for colleges and universities, and we have links to other state agencies that have funding opportunities as well. So over the next year, we're hoping to really build up that site to be a one-stop entryway into the state government grants opportunities universe. So again, that's grants.ohio.gov, and there's a lot of information there. There's some webinars on how to administer federal grants, just a lot of great information. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to go just, check out that site and see some of the information there and ask us questions. There's email box that you can send us questions anytime, and I have my small but mighty grants partnership team that will respond to you on anything that you ask, and hopefully we'll have answers. So big picture, that's how the dollars flow. So we received the coronavirus relief dollars, the CARES Act dollars from U.S. Treasury. Again, we're administering it, and so we will also be responsible for reporting back to the federal government on the use of those dollars. So there will be reporting required for those that receive the funds. So big question is, how can these dollars be used? And the short answer is they can really be used for any purpose that a local government needs to respond to or recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on your community. So there are a wide variety of uses. We have a guidance document with some examples, and we actually just last week published a new document that's also on that grants website called How You Can Use the Coronavirus Relief Dollars to Impact Ohio Communities. And it provides 2 pages of just examples. We gathered these from different communities that had, basically what people had told us they were spending the money on, and some of the initial reporting we received, and some of the innovative ideas. So, I know that a lot of local governments are using the dollars to buy PPE, personal protective equipment for staff, also for community members as they come into your buildings, doing things like putting up the plexiglass screens, marking your facilities to maintain social distancing, all of those things that communities across the state and really across the globe have been doing to respond and keep our citizens safe from COVID-19 are applicable. The dollars, the length of time that the dollars are effective right now, March 1st of this year through December 30th. So if your community applies for the dollars now and receives them, you can use them to reimburse you yourself for expenses going back to March. So that, that's when the pandemic started, that's when the CARES Act began. And so that's the big picture, general, how the funds work and what they can be used for. The House Bill 481 does have specific parameters around if the funds aren't used by mid-October, encumbered. So then they will be dispersed back to the county for redistribution to those communities that are participating in the grant. So that redistribution will happen in October, and the details of that again are in House Bill 481, and we will be doing more communication about. I make that point only to encourage those that have received the dollars to make sure that you're using them or encumbering them soon, so you don't get caught up in that redistribution requirement that would happen in October. So again, big picture, pretty much anything that your community needs to respond to coronavirus is allowable, as long as you document why and how, and maintain those documentation, because we will be audited both by the Auditor of State and likely by the federal U.S. Treasury Inspector General. So these funds will be reviewed, and so maintaining documentation is just critical as we move forward and as you make those put those dollars to use. So I'll just with that, I'll flip to some of the questions that were received ahead of time. And the first question was, can the CARES Act money be used to pay police and fire salaries during the pandemic? So this has been a frequent question, and the answer is yes. The CARES Act dollars, coronavirus relief funds, can be used to pay for those public safety and public health personnel who are substantially dedicated to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is a requirement that your local government state that the employees are dedicated, substantially dedicated to responding to the pandemic. And as long as you do that, and as long as that's the purpose of the funding, and that's the work that they're doing, then yes, you can fund those salaries out of these dollars. In both our guidance document and the U.S. Treasury, or that you've documented. So make sure that you've documented that the staff are substantially dedicated and that your local government has made that determination. So the next question, I might need a little more information about. It said, can CARES Act funds be used for the scope of work with Connected Nation to determine broadband mapping of students' service gap areas for determination of hotspots, co-location, potential water project? So the CRF, the Coronavirus Relief Funds, the CARES Act dollars can be used for purposes related to helping students with distance learning. And so I don't know the detail of this particular project, but if it is related to ensuring that students have what they need and have the connectivity needed for distance learning that's necessary during this COVID-19 pandemic, the answer is yes. I want to caveat that with the Treasury Department has been specific that future build out of telecommunications or kind of future looking installations of technology that would not be up and running and useful during the period of these dollars, again, through December 30th, that would not be allowable. So, but as long as this is a project aimed at, and that will actually be implemented to help students with their remote learning this fall, then that would be an allowable use. All right, this is a similar question. The U.S. Treasury has provided guidance on CRF funding for broadband, specifically as it relates to telework and distance education. What about the use of funds for public safety communications if it can be tied to COVID-19? So I think the examples provided, distance learning, telework for staff, telemedicine, all of those are examples of how the dollars can be used. If your public safety personnel have, technology needs related to remote work or communications that are specifically tied to the pandemic, as long as you document how they are tied specifically to the pandemic and why, then that would be allowable. So again, the key there is just documenting why that purchase is a necessary expenditure. That's the key word in the CARES Act, a necessary expenditure for the pandemic. Are we allowed to use the funds for payroll for essential employees during the pandemic or give them hazard pay from the start of the pandemic? So again, I talked earlier, the first question about police and fire. The Treasury guidance does provide that public safety and public health personnel who are substantially dedicated to pandemic response can be paid from these dollars, again, as long as that is documented and that you document how they're substantially dedicated. Hazard pay for those employees is also allowable. One note there, Treasury has been very clear at saying across the board hazard pay for all employees would not be allowable. So it has to be for employees who are engaging in that public safety and public health hazardous type work. They've very clearly said, both in their documents and on calls that we have had, that for instance, some state governments, I think, had proposed, not Ohio, but other state governments had proposed using these dollars for an across the board pay bump to all state employees, including those that were teleworking, and that is not allowable. You can use it for those that are actually needing and incurring hazard pay for that hazardous COVID-related work, but not just for, people like me who've been largely remote working and not engaging in any kind of hazardous work related to the pandemic. So the answer to that is yes, hazard pay is allowable, but it really has to be for those staff that are engaging in actual hazardous work. And again, the key is to document that you have analyzed their job duties and that the hazard pay is applicable because of, insert your reason. Okay. Can the money be used for internet equipment to offer free Wi-Fi to the community? Can we just transfer 100% of the funds to our schools? I think those are two separate questions. So can the money be used for internet equipment to offer Wi-Fi to the community? I think it would be really important here to document why you wanted to offer that community-wide Wi-Fi, because again, the Treasury guidance has talked about necessary for telework and remote work, remote learning, necessary for those telehealth related needs, but so if you have a community that has those needs that are clearly pandemic related but needs connectivity, free Wi-Fi, then again, just documenting why and documenting how that is important and how that will help and is again necessary expense related to COVID-19 and the public health emergency. So again, each instance that you're looking at an expense and thinking, is this something I can use the CARES Act dollars for? You just really have to ask yourself, can I document for an auditor how this is specifically related and responsive to the COVID-19 public health emergency? Then the question, can we transfer 100% of the funds to our schools? You absolutely can. Subgrant these dollars to your local school district for, again, they still carry with them that requirement that they be spent on expenses that are necessary for the COVID pandemic. So, but we do know that schools absolutely have coronavirus related expenses. And so you can enter into a subgrant relationship and share dollars with your local school district. The state of Ohio has granted some of our state portion of the coronavirus relief funds to schools. We've dedicated $100 million and dispersed, we're working with the Department of Education to disperse those to school districts around the state. And we've also set aside $50 million for a grant program related to providing hotspots for remote learning. So we are sharing portion of the state's CRF with schools, and your local community is absolutely able to do that too. Again, the key is documenting how it is coronavirus related. Our expenditures for upgrading our IT to better secure remote workers and eligible expense. Yes, if you have IT software security that you've implemented so that your employees can work remotely, then the expense related to the time of the pandemic, again, the time frame of March 1st through December 30th, that is an allowable expense. If you have purchased software that has, a 2-year license, for example, you would need to prorate it for that time period. This is a good time to note, Congress could extend the timeline for these dollars. You're probably aware that there are just bills. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill. The United States Senate, the Republicans have proposed a different bill, and there's negotiations that have been happening along with the White House on another coronavirus response. And both versions of the bills do extend the timeline for these dollars. So while we can't guarantee that time frame will be expanded, we are hopeful, and Governor DeWine and my team and our team that we work with in DC, we have all been advocating for extending the timeline of these dollars and for making them more flexible. And we hope that will happen. If and when it does, we will absolutely make sure that we communicate with everyone who has received the dollars. But at this point, so those types of expenses, back to the specific question for IT and IT security, that is allowable. Again, tie it specifically to the need for remote working and why that was necessary during the public health emergency. Is the cost of a mailing to our residents a covered expense if it would include COVID-related info and updates for staying safe and those kinds? Yes. If you are doing a mailing about important health information related to the pandemic, then the cost of printing and preparing and sending out that information to your community would absolutely be a covered expense. What are some examples of organizations that a small municipality could partner with to administer a small business grants program, if you have sufficient funds to do that? So I know that several communities have entered into various partnerships. Some are working together across regions. So I know of some examples where neighboring cities and villages have come together, sometimes coordinated with their county, to create kind of a community or regional program for small business grants. Some folks have entered into partnerships with local nonprofit organizations to administer those kinds of funds, and that is absolutely an allowable type of expense. So I would, I'm not an expert on what local partnerships exist. I think this team we have together right here today is one example. If you wanted to work together across communities and across jurisdictions and put together a small business grants program, that would absolutely be something that you could do using these dollars. Again, the important thing is that to remember the period that the dollars are applicable, that March 1st through December 30th. And so the time frame to put something together is pretty short, but it is absolutely an allowable expense as long as you, again, link it back to the economic effects that the pandemic has had on the small businesses in your community. Another question about hazardous duty pay. Maintenance crews, wastewater treatment plants operators worked through the pandemic. So I think that this is an important question where you would again need to document how the staff were in a hazardous situation. So again, it's just really important that reading the specific guidelines around hazardous duty pay. There's some specific FAQs that the Treasury has put out. They specifically talked about public safety personnel and public health personnel. So, you know, your wastewater treatment plant operators may fall under that public health personnel grouping. So again, I would, in that case, probably you would want to work with your local health department to put together the documentation for why that hazard pay was necessary for that specific group of employees. And again, just documenting and clearly articulating why that was a necessary expense, again, due to the public health emergency. This next question I found very interesting, and I think this is one that would require, I think, a little bit of documentation. Our township building is very old and the windows do not open and there's no running water. Can these dollars be used to purchase new windows that would open for fresh air to circulate through the building when people are there? So that's a great question. The Treasury guidance in terms of capital expenses has provided that if the capital expense would be completed during the pandemic, so it would have to be a project that you could complete quickly, you know, for use this fall, and again, document why that is necessary for the public health emergency. So in this particular instance, I think what I would recommend is having your local health department come in and look at the space and direct you that if you're going to hold meetings or have the public enter this township building, that you need to address the windows. So then you would have that documentation of why this is a necessary expense due to the public health emergency, and you could make that expenditure. Again, it would need to be something that was actually completed before that December 30th date, because, you know, it has to be something that is in use during the public health emergency, and it's a necessary expense for the public health emergency. Other examples that are similar to that have come up in other discussions, we've been asked if installing air purifier systems and other types of ventilation are appropriate expenses. And again, the answer is yes, but they do have to be things that are installed and in use during the public health emergency. The next one, I guess this is the last question that I think that I received ahead of time. One of my contacts was ordered by the health department to stay home for 14 days to quarantine. Are these wages reimbursable from CARES money? So there are specific pandemic related leave provisions that were the specific title of the leave is escaping me at the moment, but that type of leave is reimbursable using these dollars. And so it sounds like as long you do need to document that the person was on leave because they had been diagnosed or exposed to COVID, you would put them on that type of leave that was provided for by the federal government, and then you would charge that leave, the expense of that leave, to this fund. So have there been additional questions come in on the chat?
There have been a few, Director. First of all, thanks for answering all those questions. And the folks on the line, those were the questions you turned in and wanted answered. So, Director, thank you for answering all of those questions. Well done. We still have the Director on the hook for 5 more minutes. And if folks out there would like to answer or ask a few questions live and direct here on the call, be happy to do that. If you want to raise your hand or drop your question in the chat, I will take it from there. And also, we're up to 105 participants. So
All right.
how excellent.
Okay, should I just kind of go through the chat or?
Nobody's raising their hand.
Oh, okay.
So.
Oh, I see a question about food pantries in the chat. I can't answer that one. Question is, our local churches have food pantries? If we give them money from the CARES Act, is there any documentation the churches need to supply for us for what they will use the funds for? So the answer to whether you can provide funds to food banks is yes. You can provide a sub-grant to your local food bank, and they would need to document how they've spent those dollars and report back to you. And the grant agreement that you enter into with them, just I would make sure that you document in there why the food bank or how the food bank's needs have increased due to the pandemic, how that has affected your community, why these additional dollars are needed to support your food bank, and then how they're to use them, and then have them report back how they did use those to you. So you have that documentation if and when, more likely when, you will be audited. I should note also the Auditor of State does have information on the state auditor's website about how they will approach auditing these funds. So I encourage you to also visit their site because, again, thinking about and making sure that you're prepared if and when these dollars are audited is just a key.
So, Director, there's two interesting questions here. Maybe I'll ask you these two questions, and then we'll let you go, or let you peacefully listen to the rest of the presentation. Maybe we'll do that. So the first question was when the governor shut the state down and we sent people home for safety reasons, those that could not work from home, could their wages be covered?
That the answer to that, I believe, is yes. The U.S. Treasury did recently update their specific FAQ on this note. I will make a note and send that specific one to you after the meeting. That was a new FAQ that Treasury just updated. So I'll make sure you get that. I'll send it to you afterwards so you can share it with the group.
Okay. And then one last question here, and then maybe a comment. Would economic development planning related to economic recovery for small business community be eligible?
So yes, economic recovery, as long as you document how that business was impacted by the pandemic. So if they were impacted by the stay-at-home orders, if they were impacted by just decreased volume of business because of social distancing measures since even the lifting of the stay-at-home order. Again, as long as there's some criteria around how you came up with that small business program and how it relates to the pandemic and the response, the Treasury calls that the secondary effects of the pandemic related to the economy, the economic effects. So as long as you document how that was a secondary effect of the pandemic and that this is necessary to recover from that, yes.
Excellent, thank you. Director, last item just for you. I got a few comments here that if you could send the link, and if you could send it to me, I'll distribute it to the group for the guidance doc that you were referring to earlier on grants.ohio. That would be good for the group. So
I will do that.
With that, thank you very much for your time. You're welcome to stay on. Appreciate you answering all those questions and being flexible with us today. Our thanks to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and good to see all of you.
Thank you. So next up, we have Mayor Donald Mason of the city of Zanesville, who is going to share with us some creative and interesting things they've done with CARES Act funding in their community. So with that, I will turn it over to the mayor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I'm assuming you can hear okay. We didn't get a chance to test it. Okay, very good. And again, I want to thank the director. She mentioned being from having gone to Marietta College and Warren Local, and And let me say that some of the founders of Marietta made their way upstream to Zanesville and founded our fair town. And there's actually an area in Zanesville called Putnam after some of the main founders of Marietta. Let me give you the broad overview, then I'll jump into the detail. So what we did with the money, we felt our number one crisis we had to work through, the number one issue was that so many children in our community would be left either without nutrition or education. Because unfortunately, we have a great deal of low income, not just low to moderate, but low income students in our community who rely upon going to school 5 days a week for not just educational needs, but for nutritional needs. And so we felt that these were the souls that were going to be left behind should this money not be used to benefit them. And to give you an overview, Zanesville City Schools has about 3,300 students roughly for this academic enrollment. And right now, around 850 of those students will not be attending physical classes. They will be using virtual facilities. Let me relate back to a moment. I mentioned that Putnam moved from Marietta, founded part of Zanesville. There's an area in Zanesville called Putnam, and it is very low income area. And frankly, according to the U.S. Census, it has one of the lowest high-speed internet outreaches of our whole town. And so we felt those children definitely would not have nutrition and would not have access to high-speed internet for their educational needs. So we took our $894,000 that we were allocated. And again, I want to thank the legislators and executive office holders for allocating $894 million to us, or excuse me, $894,000 to us. And we put $200,000 into distance learning. Those are public health and related and economic support. And I'll get into the details of that in a moment. We put $100,000 into child care facilities compliance, because as many of you know, child care facilities no longer can meet the standards. If you had 12 students before, now you can only do 6, for example. So that cut down the economics for the daycare, but it also made it so some facilities just were not in compliance. We put $150,000 into the Citizens Economic Relief Package. And again, that was and this is a great fund that I'll talk about in great detail, where we recognize that many people impacted by COVID-19 from an employment standpoint and other reasons needed help with rent, utilities, and other such funds. Then we also put $100,000 into what was called the COVID-19 Compliance Package. Again, this was so the city could help various nonprofit organizations facilitate food delivery to vulnerable populations and the PPEs to the same population. And that vulnerable population were people affected by disabilities as well as elderly. And then we put $300,000 into internal expenses, really to cover those endeavors that we needed to do to make city government more safe to the public. And a good example is we're actually putting in a kiosk, so now that people can go to the kiosk to pay their utility bills and other bills without having to interact, with people. And that left us $44,000 for miscellaneous economic support that we can plug in here in the next few weeks when we see gaps that we may have missed. Because it's like anything else, you have a business plan or you have a plan of action, and then as you're implementing it, you realize there are things you have missed. So let me now dive into some of the details of the categories I mentioned earlier. We are putting in student internet access centers into 9 locations across the city. And again, this includes the Boy Scouts of America, includes the Muskingum County YMCA, and various other community centers serving, again, low and moderate income areas where these children, but for this money, would not have access to nutrition. And I'm saying access to nutrition for a reason, because a lot of these children get basically fed 100% of their meals, breakfast and lunch, through Zanesville City Schools. So at each of these locations I've identified, each of these 9, we are putting in Wi-Fi cards that have the capability of transmitting Wi-Fi throughout the facility. And then we've added 28 Chromebooks to each facility. Again, 9 facilities, 28 Chromebooks, and Wi-Fi capabilities, including business speed. We are blessed that we have Spectrum in Zanesville, so we're using the Spectrum business speed broadband and bandwidth. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these students are also, while they're there, going to receive nutritional supplements. I also mentioned we are putting money into our child care assistance. Again, child care facilities have been hit hard by the pandemic. This grant will allow them the money necessary to purchase necessary equipment so they can function safely. It's been mentioned earlier, anything from hand washing stations to barriers to equipment, for example, storage companies, picnic tables, refrigeration, washer, microwave. Some of the activities I've mentioned earlier are hard sanitizing, learning items, individual art supplies, storage containers. I could go on, again, PPEs, gloves, gowns, cleaning supplies, very, very necessary. Now, going back to one of my earlier points, we are helping an area called the Zanesville Civic League, which serves, again, a primarily low-income area. We had to install a smoke detector and basically an alarm system there so that we can actually have the children in the facility. But the alarm system is so that we can monitor people coming and going, so we can stay underneath the prescribed limit and also protect the equipment we are putting in the facility. And moving on, we've also improved the plumbing so that, again, children can, wash their hands safely. Let me go on and talk about the social services grant that I mentioned earlier, that we're put $100,000 into various facilities, including there's an organization called Christ Table, Helping Hands, Muskegon Behavioral Health, and that's just to name a few. And what we're using that for is, again, providing essential services for mental health and nutritional needs for those people impacted. Things that are eligible, again, include nutritional needs such as food and water, toothbrushes, toothpaste, deodorant, supplies, mops, Clorox wipes, hand sanitizers, and I could go on through the other list of COVID cleaning materials that I've mentioned earlier. But I mentioned earlier, and this is really key, a lot of people are at risk of being thrown out of their rental properties. And so we are working with an organization that's been running on limited budget for a number of years called Eastside Community Ministry, a wonderful local, I hate to use the term NGO, but non-government organization. So we are providing them $100,000 so they can help people with, again, payments for rents and mortgages that otherwise, again, due to COVID, they've lost their jobs or are working less hours, payments for water and sewer bills, payments for electricity bills, natural gas bills, and other utilities. That's $100,000. And again, I mentioned the upgrades we're doing to City Hall, again, trying to make City Hall safer. Again, it's been mentioned before, the plexiglass, the spacing materials, the little fencing to keep people from going in the wrong direction so they don't cross paths with others. And as I mentioned also, we have $44,000 we are using as backup to see where we need to plug it in. I want to emphasize, very importantly, that we in Zanesville feel that our children are basically at risk. We're not spending money. You might think we're spending money here. We are not. This is not an expenditure. This is an investment in this generation of children as well as the next generations. If these children are left behind this academic year, they will be behind the rest of their lives. And that means most likely their children and children beyond them will be left behind also. So we felt it's very important the City of Zanesville move in and fill in this gap. I want to thank the Zanesville City Council for funding it in these categories as we have prescribed. And I have a very young, youthful staff who thinks about children. I'm blessed to have them helping to come up with this program. But again, thank you to the General Assembly, OBM, and the federal government on this.
Mayor Mason, thank you for that inspirational message of sharing and what you're doing in Zanesville. We're going to have some time at the end for questions, so if you can hold on with us, I'd like to kick it over to Mayor Hudson from Wellston to also share some updates on what they're working with in the village of Wellston.
Thank you for having me on today. I appreciate that. First, I want to hats off to Mayor Mason for taking upon that great challenge of working with the kids. It's throughout Southern Ohio, not just Zanesville, that the kids are certainly at risk. And I just wish I had the same resources to leverage towards that. We're a much smaller town down here. A little background about Wellston, we're about 5,000 folks. We have about over 60% of our population is on some sort of government income, so our poverty levels is relatively high. As we looked at our resources, we just received a little over $100,000 from the relief fund, and we were looking at what was the best thing that we could do for our citizens and our folks to try to mitigate some of the damage that they are feeling from this pandemic. So one of the contacts I have through OVRDC is the Jackson County Community Action Agency. It's a nonprofit. And what they do is they try to help keep people in their homes, keep the utilities turned on, and have some sorts of a normal life. So I reached out to Cheryl Thiessen, their local director, and we chatted about what would be the best, how could I help, or how could the city help with their endeavors as they have a limited budget as well. So what we decided to do was grant their department funds to help them continue their mission of keeping folks' utilities turned on. We provided a list of all of our citizens that during the time period from March 1st to July 10th, they had become in arrears on their utility payments with the city. We researched the frequently asked questions, found that we could provide funds to nonprofits for individuals in financial need. They're using their funds to help bring these accounts back to being current. And at the end of the process, we will replace their funds with grants from our funds, the tune of roughly $40,000, which doesn't seem like a lot of money, but in a town like this, it certainly does help. One of the issues we have here that brought this to bear is that we have our county health code says that if you don't have running water, then your house is not inhabitable. And we had a lot of folks that were at risk that not be able to pay some of these $800-900 bills. And you can't have people out on the streets. You can't have people trying to live in homes without water. So we thought this was the best use of our funds. We didn't have that many needs for PPEs. We didn't have that many reconfigurations or a city building. So we're reaching out to other folks. We're talking with our local schools now as they're ramping back up, that if I have money left over, and I say I as in the city, I apologize for that, but we have money left over, that we will be granting them money to help with their school supplies, with their teaching aids, with the things they need to teach the kids remotely. We all have broadband issues down here, and they're trying to set up hotspots to help with that, those communications. So the only other thing that we did is we updated our audio-visual system so we could stream city council, so that we could conduct city business. Everything else, PPEs, sanitizers, all that stuff was really, while important, wasn't what we wanted to do with the money. We wanted to do the best we could for our citizens, and we feel the best way to do that was to partner with community action, partner with our schools, and take that approach to it. And as we get deeper into this, get closer to our deadlines, we will try to come up with more creative ways to use the money, and hopefully there'll be another round, and hopefully we can do even more down the road. But again, I applaud Mayor Mason. That's a very, very excellent approach to using that sum of money, and hats off to you and the city of Zanesville. So that's really all I have.
Thanks, Mayor, and hats off to you as well. I know the jobs you're all trying to do are difficult and often thankless, so our thanks to you as well. So don't feel left behind in that. Friends, we still have about 10 minutes left on the call. If you have other questions or other comments for any of our presenters, including Mayor Mason, Director Murnieks, or Mayor Hudson, I'd be happy to entertain those in the chat window or raise your hand, and I will unmute you to ask the question. One second, got some questions coming in. Okay, first question is from Brian Vatican. Brian, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, thanks, Brett. Hey, everyone. I'm with Rural Action, and I just had a sort of specific question. You know, we have, since the beginning here, administered done about $85,000 in recovery grants to for-profit businesses and nonprofits, Facebook fundraisers, different sources, and a lot of people have been asking if this would be an eligible source, and I know that Columbus has done it. But one question that we had is, you know, I understand the restrictions on the eligibility side of needing to have experienced some kind of serious economic downturn because of the pandemic and the stay-at-home order, but on the use side, so if we were to re-grant to a for-profit business as a recovery grant, is that unrestricted to them? I mean, could they use that to pay their rent and utilities, or do they need to provide a budget and receipts for PPE or, you know, installing these type of air purifiers and things like that? I wasn't sure if anyone had run into that.
I was going to say, maybe the directors are still on. As she chimes in, thank you.
Hi. If I'm understanding the question correctly, is it if you subgrant the dollars, does the person receiving the grant from you still have to spend the dollars in compliance with the CARES Act? Is that the gist of it, or?
Yes, I guess so. And if there's, you know, for the for-profit businesses, are there more restrictions? You know, do they have a narrower list of eligible expenses?
Sure. So I guess it depends on how you set up, whether it's a subgranting relationship or if you're providing financial assistance that is more like economic relief payments. So if you're just making an economic relief payment to them and you've set up criteria for how you've determined how to calculate that economic relief, and you're, you know, providing it to, you know, lots of businesses, private businesses in your region that have met that criteria, then they can spend it however they need on, you know, depending on their personal or, you know, businesses' economic related needs. And so they don't have to just be limited to spending it on PPE or, you know, specific allowable CARES Act allowable related expenses. So if you're setting up an economic relief program like that, it can be more flexible, and you don't have to, for instance, we will never require you to report back to the state how, you know, dollars that, you know, far down the line were ultimately used. We're just going to ask the local governments to report to us how you spent them, and so you would categorize that as economic relief to a small business. And then so you will need to keep your documentation about how you know, what your criteria were, how you determined that the businesses needed economic relief, and how that was specifically necessary because of the COVID pandemic. But you don't have to restrict how they spend the dollars once you provide them with economic relief. Now, if you're giving dollars to a nonprofit organization or someone else to do something on your behalf, and it's more like a sub-grant relationship, then it does carry those restrictions. Or if you're sub-granting it to your school or another government entity, then it does carry along those restrictions. So hopefully that makes sense.
Very helpful. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you, Director. Thanks, Brian. Other questions from the partners to anybody, any of our speakers? Still have 5 minutes left. All right. I know how to take a hint. So for those on the call, Director Murnieks, Mayor Hudson, Mayor Mason, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for sharing information with us on behalf of the Georgia Williams School at Ohio University, Buckeye Hills Regional Council, all the other LDD partners. I'm going to give them some homework. For those of you that are out there with questions and other needs, please feel free to reach out to your local development district. We're here to help you. So if there are questions we can answer or other things we can do, please feel free to connect with us to do that. So with that, just a reminder that this session was recorded. We'll be sharing the recording with you. We'll have a few follow-up documents to share with you as well. And if you have any other questions afterwards, you can always feel free to connect with us and we'll do our best to get those answered for you. So again, for our speakers today, thanks for sharing your time with us. And everybody on the line, thanks so much. And I'm giving you 4 minutes back. So everyone, have a wonderful week and thanks for joining us today. Thank you.